with the dynamic duo. Hopefully we'll make it a trio again. It's always crazy when our schedules conflict, and it seems like lately it's been my schedule, but good to be back with everybody. Hope you're watching us on Facebook Live, and if not, you'll be listening to us later. We're just excited and blessed to be with you. As I said, this is episode 24. It's gone pretty fast, guys, and it's just amazing from where we started to get here. So that, I guess that means we're, about almost 6 months in? I guess. That's crazy. Right. Anyway, we hope it's been a blessing to you. It certainly has been to us. There's a lot of thought and prayer gone into every topic that we have discussed, and we thank you for your feedback. Today is no different. Today is a topic that is important to all three of us, and certainly should be important to all of us, all the listeners and the watchers. And so we're excited to get started with that. Justin, why don't you talk about what we're going to talk about today?
Sure. Gee, thank you. It's good to have you back. We want to introduce the topic of marriage to you today and talk about the way that God designed marriage and the way that we ought to view marriage. And we come on that from that topic to because Terry and I are both officiating a wedding this weekend, so we had the idea, well, let's talk about what marriage is. I don't know if this is really the wedding season. Fall is starting. The weather outside certainly indicates that. The leaves will start to change, at least in the more northern climates than ours right now. But this weekend is wedding weekend, mainly because Auburn, Alabama, and LSU are all on a bye week.
So it just, you got to have your priorities right.
It happens to be a weekend that many have chosen to wed or to commit their lives together, and that's why we kind of want to bring that topic to you today.
Yeah, we titled it "Just Married," which is a play on obviously those who are getting married, but also want to talk about when we get married, and all three of us are, and very happily married, and been married for a number of years. A couple of us now. Well, I guess you've been married 9, 10, 11.
6
I can always remember your wedding anniversary.
6 years, yep.
And so time gets away, and all, but when you think about just married, we're not just married. It's such something that is so vital to our lives. For instance, when Adam was in the garden, God wanted him to be able to find a helper amongst the animals. I'm glad he didn't, but he did put him to sleep, and when he put him to sleep, he took that rib, made woman. Adam woke up, and remember now, he'd been looking at all those animals. He'd been looking at everything that in the garden, from the animals to the trees to everything. He's just been by himself. Don't know how much time had passed, but here's what I do know. When he opened his eyes, I am quite confident Eve was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And he made that comment that's recorded there in Genesis, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, she'll be called woman because she was taken out of man. And the way I interpret that is, this is the most beautiful being I've ever seen. And with those words and with that thought, God married them. And so when God institutionalizes something, when he institutes something, it is definitely of importance. And so him instituting the marriage, and the family, the devil, though, he tried to slither his way in, and he did too. He was successful, and we'll talk, I'm sure, more about that. But the bottom line is, God made marriage. And there are a lot of people today that want to pervert what God has made and be able to try to lessen it. But to all the couples out there, and to those who desire that, and to those who will be getting married this weekend or very soon, we want you to know that God expects us to be married not just for a couple years, not just for 10 years, but for all of our lives. And with that, I think it's important for us to kind of dive into that subject.
Yeah, and we think about marriage, we understand that because it was established by God, it's perfect, right? The idea of marriage, the functionality of marriage, everything about it is perfect because it was designed by God. And like anything else in this life, when man puts his own spin on it, is when it gets messed up. right? When man tries to rearrange the rules of marriage, the expectations of marriage, anytime that something's done outside of the boundaries that God has established, then we're bound to have trouble. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly what's happened in marriage. Nowadays, this idea of marriage seems to be, from a worldly perspective, of a matter of convenience. Mm-hmm. Sure, people fall in love, and this is the love of my life, until the first big fight, or until you say that thing that can't be taken back, or until I decide I don't like you, or I see something better. All of these things, and these are man's interjections to, as you said, pervert what God has established. And so right off the top, I think it's just important that we continue to go back to the foundation of why we're here, is that we're God created. And we are here to fulfill God's purpose for our lives. And one of those things that God wants us to do is to have an established, long, healthy, and spiritual marriage.
Absolutely.
Hollywood's had an incredible impact on our society, I believe, especially young people. You see all these actors and actresses in your favorite movie or on your favorite TV show, and you idolize them, and then we see that they have confused marriage with dating, and they get married, and 3 months later they're divorced, and then they're marrying someone else and then divorcing them, and it's almost like you're dating in
well, they don't really divorce, they annul, which they think makes it okay, right?
Right. And it's almost like we're in kindergarten or elementary school, where we come home every week with a different girlfriend because somebody played with us on the playground. And that's their view of it, and it really infiltrates the minds of young people. So it's a very dangerous topic because of what Hollywood and what a lot of our people we look up to tell us about it. So I don't think we talk about it a biblically way enough.
Yeah. When you think about marriage and you think about family, you do have a lot of people who have given it a bad rap. There are people that are in television, some that make a lot of money, or many of them make a lot of money, like you said, that have given marriage such a bad reputation. It's just become something that, maybe we should let's just get married this weekend or whatever. And there's not a lot of thought goes into it, not a lot of prayer, and it's certainly not God-centered. One thing about marriage that's so important, and I think when it's all said and done, I will have done, I'm counting January, even though that's going to be 2018. I've known about it this year. I think I will have done 6 or 7 weddings this year, and in all of those, I require the couples to go through some type of premarital counseling, because I have to stand before God in judgment. And now with that, I'm not a licensed counselor, but I am licensed in some material that I'm able to give. But when we do that, what I do is I sit them down in here, and I will tell them all, just like we all would, the best thing you can do is make sure that your marriage to one another is based on a marriage to Christ. Mm-hmm. Because when we put God first in our lives, when we put Him first in our own lives, when we put Him first in our family's lives, is it going to cause us to have zero problems? No. I mean, we're going to have issues. We're going to have struggles. We're going to have fusses and fights. I tell people I can't get along with my own self. If I'm by myself long enough, I get on my own nerves, But I know I'm going to get on my wife's and my children's. But we can work through anything. We can work through challenges. So the marriages that are firm are built on the foundation of Christ.
Yeah, and we go back to these common sayings that we have. We've all been to funeral homes, and we understand this person who's passed away, who was faithful in the Lord, and we tend to say to one another, we don't know how people handle situations like this if they didn't have a relationship with God. Well, I think the same can be said of a marriage relationship. How in the world do you expect to have a successful relationship in a marriage without God being at the center. And I think that's the driving force. And and I know in each of our situations, we are three incredibly blessed guys.
No doubt.
By the wives that we have. We have been joined with godly women, and I can just tell you, for me personally, for every bit of strength that I may exhibit without the support and the encouragement of my wife,
Right.
sorry, I'm a mess. I'm just not what I need to be. As early as this morning, Samantha and I were talking, and she literally, with all the things that she has going on and all the responsibilities and the weight of life on her at this point in time, she literally said to me, I just don't think we talk about God as much as we ought to. And we do talk about God.
Yeah.
We're involved. We're faithful. We are spiritual. We try to be good influences to people. But to have someone that is your best friend, your closest person, to say to you, not in criticism, but in support, we need to talk about God more. Man, that's exactly what I needed to hear. And that's what makes marriage, again, our marriage isn't perfect, but that's what makes marriage heading in the right direction, is when God's at the center.
I guess one of my favorite parts of a wedding ceremony, and this weekend will be my second ever to help. I'm helping officiate. I did the first one, I guess, altogether, but it's only my second one. But what I like is the whole unity candle thing. I know that's more of the traditional view where you go light the candle together, and you take one from maybe the groom's family and the wife's family, and or the bride's family, you put it together, and then you're blowing those out, because as the Bible tells us, we are leaving our fathers and mothers, we're leaving our families, and we are being united to our spouse, right? And not saying that our in-laws or our parents are not involved anymore, but it is a together type thing that we are growing and maturing with each other. Ashley and I, when we were married, we planted a tree. It was just kind of a new thing, kind of breaking the tradition, but a new way of expressing that our parents had a little bit of the dirt that they were able to put in, and then Ashley and I as well. So we planted a Japanese maple, and that dirt kind of planted into the ground, or into the pot at the time, is in the ground now, was signifying our unity to each other. This weekend, my cousin who's getting married and her soon-to-be husband, they are doing a cord each. So a cord that represents the life of Kemper, a cord that represents the life of Tate, and then a cord that represents God. And they're going to weave those together, and it comes from Ecclesiastes 4. And I know we've said it here a lot, but a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And it shows that no matter what, even though we are leaving our parents and uniting to our spouse, God has got to be in the center, because a 2-fold cord it can break a lot easier than a 3-fold cord, right? And God has got to be woven into every aspect of our lives.
That is the first I've heard of that type of unity. I thought I'd done every one of them, especially even different one, and I really like it. That's pretty special. But another one that's been popular over the course of the years is a salt covenant, and that salt covenant really comes from Bible-based information, where people would make a covenant with one another, a promise with one another. They would carry some salt in a pouch, and some would put their salt in the pouch, and the other one would put it in there. And the point was, we will keep this covenant, this bond, this promise, as long as it would take for somebody to be able to separate those grains of salt. And that's the mindset. And when I was teaching school, again, now I've been out of school teaching for a while, been out of youth ministry for a while. I do not think I'm that out of touch with it to know that it's not gotten better. But it was amazing to me how many people thought, I don't know if I can be married to the same person 50 years. And that was really heartbreaking at the time, but that's what's being taught. That's what's out there. And, sometimes people have been dealt a hand where, it was a bad situation. They thought they were. I know someone who I love very much, and no one you guys would know or anything, so they don't go to church here. But they married somebody that I thought was as rock solid as a Christian as you could possibly find. They had a couple kids together. Everything seemed great, and then all of a sudden one day he left her for another woman, And it just blew my mind. And sometimes you're dealt hands like that. That woman did nothing. That wife, that mother did nothing to cause that guy to do that. It just happened. So with those exceptions out there in mind, please know that the way we must approach our marriages are, hey, this is not just happen chance. This is not just something that I think I'm going to do because it's just a cool thing to do or whatever. And, if I get tired of them, I'll leave them in a few years. That is so devastating, that mindset. We need to understand, like George has pointed out and you've pointed out through the covenants, this is a bond that we're entering before God. Mm-hmm. I promised in 1998 to marry my wife before God and those witnesses, to love her if she gets sick, to love her if she's healthy, to love her if we don't have any money, or to love her if we just have a little bit of money. That's promises that we made to one another. My children, I want them to learn how to be a husband, how to be a wife, how to be mamas and daddies through us. I want us to give the right example. And that includes when you mentioned, you don't have a perfect marriage, nor do I. Michelle's married to me. What do you expect? But at the end of the day, making things right. Yeah. Making sure that I might go back and say, look, I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that to mama or whatever, or to her, Those things are really important, I believe, for marriages to be successful.
Yeah, and another piece of that, and I think this is something that's been, I know in your marriage counseling sessions with people, outside of the relationship with God that's necessary, that key ingredient that has to exist is communication, right? Communication has to be there. Now, in my wife and I's circumstances in our life, when we have a disagreement or something, when I've done something stupid, which is entirely possible, and I have history, chances are, if my wife's upset with me, we're not going to talk about it right now, because she needs time. She needs time to process it, because she doesn't want to say the wrong thing. She wants to process how she really feels and get past any initial, like if I hurt her feelings or I said something maybe I shouldn't have said. She needs to get past that so that she can get into a communication mode. And then, always, we are going to talk. Sam's going to say what's on her mind, and I appreciate that. And the key for us, though, is that we do have that communication. I need to always be able to talk to her about anything that's going on with me, any weaknesses, any shortcomings, any fears I have. And we talk about the good things, the victories. When I come home from work, she's wanting to know, what projects am I working on, how are they going, and how is it being received, and all that. Why? Because she's my person. Mm-hmm. She's my support, and she lifts me up. And there's a logical side of this too. I want to be with my wife. I want to spend time with her. When I'm away, I was traveling a couple weeks ago, I missed being in proximity to my wife. I remember years ago being in the paintball business, I had to go set up a customer in Europe, and they wanted to meet me in Amsterdam. So I go to Amsterdam and did a 2-hour meeting, did our sales presentation, got the money, everything was great. Then I had a day and a half in Amsterdam. I'm walking around and I'm looking and I'm seeing, cool architecture. And I turn and I'm like, isn't this... There was nobody there. It was just me. It's not fun. That was not fun for me. Something was clearly missing in that moment. And you know what was missing? Samantha was missing. And so in many areas of my life, I have great friends. Look, I don't take her to play golf with us, right? She's not going to play rook with us, right? That's our time. But most time, I want to be with her. Yeah. Because she's who keeps me whole and keeps me sound, and I couldn't do without her.
Can I ask you a question on the communication side of things? Does that get easier as kids leave the house? Because I know y'all have no kids in the house now.
Right.
Does that get easier because communication is the number one key for any relationship to succeed? And Ashley and I do a fairly good job of communicating with each other. But sometimes, you know how it is, just hectic with kids. Yeah. The last 2 nights, our kids, as soon as they have had their dinner, they've had their baths, they're ready for bed, Grayson's had his bottle, it's like somebody has put an energy shot or a 5-hour energy into whatever they ate or drank before bed because they are super wild and crazy.
Yeah.
And right now we have a lot of stuff going on with Fall Festival at church, and stuff at school. I'm coaching basketball. Ashley's working. And we have this wedding on all this weekend. And her mom had made a comment or something like, hey, mention this to Justin one evening or something. And she keeps forgetting. She's like, it's hard to have time, especially when our kids are crazy, in the evening. So all that to ask the question, does that get easier? Maybe life is still hectic, I understand, still busy.
Yeah.
But does that get easier with kids or without kids?
It does. I mean, one of the things that, that I've always tried to impress on people who would ask for advice is, if we had an issue, we never talked about it in front of our kids. And that's a mistake I think some people make, is they have these arguments and these blowouts and these drag-out fights in front of their children, and that's terrible and dangerous in a lot of ways. That was never a thing for us. But yeah, I mean, it is easier to have, quote, opportunity, but also then eliminates the excuse of buying a little time to kind of cool down because there's nobody to interfere.
I remember when we did premarital counseling, we didn't take it with Terry. I was in Auburn at the time, so my college minister did our premarital counseling, and they really encouraged all the couples. We took it with probably, I think, 3 other couples that were in that student ministry there. And they said, even when you have kids, especially later down the road, make sure you and your wife or your spouse, y'all go on dates.
Sounds like a chapter in my book.
Well, how hard is that to still do? And when you're shaking your head like, yep, absolutely, we will. But it's really hard because our kids are small. We want to be around them. We want to watch them grow up and be an influence in their lives. And your kids are a little older, Terry, but I know you and Michelle are the same way. You want to be. So it's hard to find that time. When
my kids spend the night at their grandma's, they usually call us to come get them. So yeah.
I've heard of couples when the empty nest syndrome, right? When their kids get out of the house, then they look across the table at their spouse, and it's like looking at a total stranger. Because you spent 18 years totally invested in your kids, that you've forgotten to love your spouse. You've forgotten to communicate with your spouse. And even though Ashley and I are a terrible example of doing this, I think going on dates and spending time, just you and your spouse, maybe give you the opportunities to communicate more.
Yeah, I do write about that in the book. I do think it's something that's very neglected. I think that couples quit dating. Now, here's something that may be a misconception about that. You don't necessarily have to go anywhere.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to spend money.
Very good point.
People talk about, one of the rules will be, we don't have any money. I write about it in my book. But anyhow, it can be cheap. Michelle and I, we got 1 or 2 TV shows we watch, and we're fortunate the way our house is set up. It's kind of like we have one room that the kids can go in, and we have this other room. But it's not walled off. We can still walk back and forth and see each other and all that. So sometimes it's just sitting there close to one another watching a show. I know, George, you guys like movies. And I know you got grandkids, and Samantha and you both have a lot on you with your situation with your son-in-law and everything. But I know you guys have done a good job of that, man. You and Ashley can take a stroll down to the barn, man.
That's right. Go work cows together.
Yeah, man. Hey, what kind of bond? But the seriousness of this is this. That is very important. There are those I could point to as widows. One in particular, a very smart lady here at this church. She loved her husband very much. He died, and she misses him very much. But they had a tremendous bond. They dated. He courted her, as the old saying goes. And those are things that we should never take for granted. And that is something that I do not want that to be for Michelle and I. As sad as it'll be when our Madeline is gone, Bo will already have been gone. At least that's the plan.
He may be back home.
By then. But anyhow, that's the plan. But I don't want to look across Michelle and be like, "Who in the world are you?" That would be terrible.
Let me tell you, we're Samantha and I are in the grandparent stage now, right? So we've been through the young kids at home, right? Going through all of that. They're first. Everything they need comes first, no matter what. And then slowly they start, as I like to say, falling off payroll, right? And
maybe that's a reason to celebrate right there.
It ain't bad. And so, and then you do go through this little bit of time period when it's just the two of you, and there's a transition period, but our car, our truck knows the way to get to our kids whenever we need to see them or whatever, and then when you move into being grandparents, your world completely changes. But I think the key here for me, to kind of push across to everybody, is to build a relationship where you look forward to these milestones together. Samantha and I literally last night were talking about our grandsons, and it was really overwhelming because we couldn't really fathom where we were in life, having the amazing grandsons that we have, and each of them being so individualistic, and the difference between Charlie and Owen, even in ages and personalities, and how we love them beyond what we thought was even possible. And the best part of that is that we do that together. It's something that whether it is looking forward to being able to go on vacation by yourselves, whether it is looking forward to seeing your kids grow up and to become adults and to build their own careers and their own families, to becoming grandparents. What makes this great is we get to do all of these things together. And one of the keys to my thinking on this is there's an essential element of that, obviously God being the center, but we get to do something every week together that we've been doing with or without kids, with or without grandkids, and we get to worship together. And I think that's such a vital part of a successful marriage.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, that's also a tremendous example you have set before your children and your grandchildren. Going back kind of on the communication front, talking about communication, again, I wrote a book, 21 Habits of Highly Functioning Families, and part of that deals with children, part of that deals with husbands and wives, and so I'm going back to a lot of that book. But part of communicating is also the way we communicate it, the way we talk to one another. I am loud by nature. I just have a loud voice. I coach linebackers, and I sometimes bring that home to my family. And so I apologize numerous times for my tone of voice issues, but I also know that with that voice, even though it's served me well in some areas of life, it certainly can get me in, the communication trouble. Because sometimes I will say something and it probably comes out like I'm yelling, but I'm not. Now I try to work on that. I don't just use it as an excuse. But I say that to say this. I've been in homes where people yell at one another all the time. I mean, back and forth. We have a rule in our home. I write about it in the book. We don't yell across the house at each other.
Even in a good way, right?
Even in a good way. We don't say, hey, Michelle, get in here. Or, hey, Bo, or hey, Matt. If they do it, I try not to yell back and correct them. But I will say, we do not yell. If you need your mother, you get on the legs that God gave you and you go see her face to face.
I used to get in trouble for that as a kid.
It drives me crazy.
Sorry.
Because what happens is that creates a habit where all we do is yell.
Yep.
And that is no fun. That is zero fun, sir, to quote Remember the Titans. I just watched that the other day.
Zero fun, sir.
Zero fun, sir. And so, we do not need to yell at each other. Remember, Adam saw Eve. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. She was part of him. He was part of her. And that's what our marriages ought to be.
We don't talk haven't talked a ton about marriage in the teen class a lot here, but we do talk about friends a lot and the influence that friends can have on us, and try to encourage these kids to tell them that I went to a small high school, Mobile Christian School, graduated with 61, and I hang out with 2 of them regularly. Right. One of them's my wife's cousin, and the second one is my wife, okay, which I see her every day.
You hang out with an old Bible teacher there.
Yeah, 1 or 2. But, so I went to a small school where I knew everybody, and I don't have those friends in high school are not my lifelong friends. But when we date, and because I tell those kids that be careful who you choose as friends, because if they're a bad influence on you, if they're not trying as hard as you to get to heaven, you don't need them, because they're not going to be around forever anyways.
That's right.
when we start to date another spouse, when we start to date the other gender, make sure it's somebody who we want to marry. Make sure it's somebody who has the same attributes that God designs or that God depicts in the Bible. Somebody who is a godly woman or a godly man that is going to strive to get to heaven as much as we do. Yeah. You know, I hate the old saying, the coaches saying, I want you to give 110%. Well, another one I hate is when we think of marriage should be a 50-50 relationship. No, it shouldn't, right? No. Because if we're 50-50, I'm only giving half effort. It should be 100-100. Yeah, I should give full effort. Ashley should give full effort. We should strive to do our best for each other every day. And ultimately, if we are like that three-folded cord, we're going to give our best to God as well. You know, I read this, and I have it right here, so I'm just going to read it here. When you say yes on your marriage day, when I say I do, and I'm saying yes to whoever I'm marrying, we yield to each other, we extend love to each other, and we secure privacy with each other. Right? So I thought it was really cool. A good acrostic there is that I'm yielding everything I have to my wife, just like I yield everything I have to Jesus Christ.
That's right.
I'm extending love to her no matter what. See, I see her in her prettiest form and her ugliest form. She sees me in my prettiest form and my ugliest form, which my ugliest form's a lot uglier than her ugliest form, right?
Agreed.
And then we secure privacy with each other, right? We can tell each other anything that's on our mind, anything about our day, and we're willing to listen and communicate with each other. With that, I'll bring my portion to a close today.
Well, for me, I think it speaks volumes to not only be a part of a spiritual, godly marriage, but to be friends and involved with people, have friendships who have a godly marriage. Because I think there is the opportunity for us to encourage one another in sometimes we just struggle, and it's not like, hey, I'm going to come to Terry and talk about problems I'm having at home or something like that, but we're there to support one another. That's the very reason why this podcast was created, right? Because we need to be there for one another, to edify one another, to build each other up, because outside of the Bible itself, there is no true manual for marriage, right? And so it's a trial and error, and I can say for me it's been trial and make mistakes and say I'm sorry about it and try to move on to do better. And I'll end also with this part. I want to go back for half a second to what you talked about dating. I know, witnessing a lot of Terry's ministry as a youth minister, he really, really pushed a lot about the kind of people that you date, because that ends up being the kind of people that you marry. And that you don't date people you wouldn't marry. Why? Because you're going to fall in love with somebody that you're dating, right?
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah. And I long since told my children when they started the dating process that when you commit your heart to somebody even early on, that blinds you sometimes. The heart gets in the way of good sound thinking. So if we try to be up in front of that, if we think only those people to spend time with who would be someone who would help me get to heaven, man, our chances of having a successful marriage and a successful life are so much better. It's no guarantee, right? Because circumstances of life. But we need to search out godly friends, godly people to date, godly people to marry, and godly people to be with.
Boy, it's a lot. It's past. I mean, the fastest 30-something minutes I've ever seen. There's so many more things to say. Yeah. But in conclusion, that is very true. When I was in youth ministry, I really tried. I believe the number one decision we all make is the decision to follow Jesus Christ. The most important decision we'll ever make is the one when it comes to our soul, when it comes to our giving our lives to God. But I believe the second most important decision is who we marry. I've seen it make and break. I've seen it just be a great decision. I've seen it be an awful decision. And so I've seen nothing that will change my mind on that being the second most important decision we make. But with that, I wrote a curriculum one time entitled Date Your Future Mate, which is what I taught to teenagers for a long time. It's probably outdated now, but back in the day, it was pretty on point. But I say that to say this. One of the points in it is something that I do not believe stops after you get married, or it shouldn't, is we need to saturate our lives with the power of prayer. We need to make sure we are soaking our lives up in prayer. I pray every day, every single day, for my children to grow up to be great Christians and to marry great Christians. That goes without fail. I want them to have great friends. I want them to do great things in life. But if they can be a great Christian, marry a great Christian, they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And with that, I also pray that Michelle and I, our relationship with one another, most importantly, our relationship with God, will grow every day. If you are wanting to get married, and listen, I think it's a very, very powerful desire and dream. If you are desiring that, be in prayer about it. Be praying about your future mate. Be praying about your marriage now. With God, all things, maybe your marriage is struggling. With God, all things are possible. We can work it out, but He's got to be at the center of it. It's something that can be salvaged. It's something that can be made right. And for those who had unfortunate circumstances, and there are a lot of you out there, keep praying. Keep praying, because God's going to take care of you.
Yes.
Because after all, we're not just married. It's a decision we make that I believe lasts us for all eternity. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. It's good to have the trio back. I hope that this has been edifying to you. As always, we want you to know we're satisfied as long as God is glorified and you're edified. Please share this, tune in, download, and give us some feedback. See you next week.